You're listening to Natural Resources University. In this podcast network, our hosts are university researchers and extension specialists, opening your gateway to the science of natural resource management.
Pond University is your one-stop shop for all things pond management. It is hosted by Mitchell Ziske and Megan Gunn from Purdue University and Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. Join us as we talk with biologists, managers, and pond owners about the topics and tools needed to manage your pond for good habitat and great fishing. So grab a notebook and a beverage and sit back and enjoy Pond University. Welcome back, everyone. It's great to virtually see you for another episode. Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm good, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good. Doing good. Just, plowing through. So what have you been up to these past couple of weeks?
What have I been doing? I think the last episode we talked about how I was getting ready to release a curriculum connecting freedom seekers and the Great Lakes. That has been done, and so that took a lot of time and just like advertising that. I'm getting ready for summer. I'm the coordinator for a summer research program that undergraduates get to participate in. So we advertise that, and applications are coming in. So I'm looking at those. And
for those that don't know, our department here offers a summer practicum for our students where they go up into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for 5 weeks. Last year, obviously, that couldn't happen. It was modified and delivered on campus because of COVID. But we're planning to do our traditional practicum this summer up in Michigan, and so we're starting to plan for that. And there are lots of things we need to change to, because of COVID. But we're hoping to be able to give students that practical experience. And I'm also, trying to find students to help me with my extension programs this summer. I usually get students in to help me with my pond management stuff. I have a student right now working on a new publication on aquatic plants and how to manage plants, and we're hoping to get some waterproof ID cards printed for plant ID, so you can take them out, put them in your tackle box and take them out to your pond, and when you see plants, you've got some ID cards there that can help you identify them. So
that'll be really useful. I always think about how I have this fish guide, but it's not waterproof. And we have had several of those books in the labs, and they're just all water warped, and it would be nice to have that one waterproof.
Yeah, and there are some great fish guides out there, both specific for your state or across, North America. But we don't encounter that many species in our ponds, so we, last year I think it was, we produced a fish ID guide for ponds that include the top 20 or 30 species you might find in a pond, and it's waterproof, and it's the size of a postcard, so you can put it in your tackle box or put it in your truck and have it on hand if you want to identify some stuff in your pond, and that's the approach we want to take with these plants as well.
Yeah, that's a great resource to have in your tackle box right with you.
So we have an exciting episode today. We have Matt Rail coming on our show today, and some of you may know Matt. Matt is actually the co-host of another podcast called Sitting Dockside. Sitting Dockside covers all things pond and private lake management, so very similar to the stuff that we cover in this podcast. I think his podcast has been running now for about a year. They have more episodes than us, and we'll link to that podcast in our show notes. And so Matt's going to tell us a little bit about his experience, what led him to develop that podcast, and some of the fun that he's had with that. And Matt also is involved with the Private Water Natural Resources Association and other groups that really aim to connect people who work on ponds and small lakes, and to educate pond owners as well. So he very much has a similar mission to us, and it's going to be great talking to him about some of his experiences, and he's going to talk about a couple of topics that are near to his heart. So
awesome. I'm excited to hear all of his knowledge, and like you said, connecting people to the resources is what we're all about, and knowing that somebody else is also out there doing it, that's so cool.
Yeah. And he's also a podcasting expert, so he'll be able to tell us what we're doing wrong and give us some tips for the future. So Essential Pond Terms, the segment where we hope to expand your vocabulary by defining important terms for pond management.
In this episode, we are going to define 3 pond terms: macrophytes, photosynthesis, and BOD. Macrophytes are simply large plants that you might find in a pond or lake. When people use this term, they are usually referring to submerging vegetation like pondweeds. Next is photosynthesis. If you remember back to your basic biology course at high school, photosynthesis is what all plants and algae use to get energy. During the day, they combine sunlight with carbon dioxide and nutrients to produce energy for themselves. This is important in ponds because in most cases, the level of nutrients will control the amount of plants and algae you have, but also these plants provide important food and energy to other organisms. In contrast to what happens during the day, at night, when there's no sunlight, plants actually breathe and use oxygen just like we do. This brings us to BOD, which stands for biological oxygen demand. This is the total oxygen demand in the system, meaning the total of all organisms that use oxygen. This includes plants at night, but also things like bacteria, invertebrates, and fish. Typically, ponds with higher nutrients have a higher BOD and may experience periods of low oxygen if aeration and similar techniques are not used.
Well, hi, Matt. Welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Hey, man, I'm glad to be here. That's for sure.
We were just saying that, you're the expert on podcasting, so you'll be able to tell us what we're doing wrong and give us lots of tips and tricks.
No, there's no expert. That's for sure. It's just a bunch of guys, talking about something we like, and it just gets to be easier as you continue to do it. That's the only advice, is continue to get good education out there, because education in this world and this industry is such a necessity. Science-based, true facts. Unfortunately, Google has carried the ball a long ways, and there's different, not to say it's really inaccurate, it's just that there's different answers for different demographics. That's also a promotional base, but this science is science, and getting that knowledge. So that's why I was complimenting you guys, is just like what you guys are doing here. Anything that these lake, pond, private, even shore owners of larger lakes that maybe even be public, but what you're getting to not getting the education out, I really got a compliment for you. And I will say, I told my daughter that we were going to meet Megan Gunn today, and she was like, because we're watching some superhero shows, and she was like, Felicity Smoke and Caitlin Snow off Flash, and she thought Megan Gunn sounded like a superhero name.
That's cool.
And so we were like, she's like, yeah, we were having some fun with that. So I'll have to tell them I met a pond superhero today. So
yeah,
go get a cape.
She is a superhero. That's why she is able to drag me along for the ride here. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I've been in this industry for for a little longer than 20 years now. It doesn't feel that way, but when I look in the mirror and see all the gray hair, it does look that way. So, and in this industry, I'm very passionate about it. And we did a talk just a couple weeks ago with a really legend fisherman called Bill Dance, and he talked about fishing with his daddy and his time with his family, and this time of communion in which they had on ponds and lakes. And I think he says a lot better than I ever will, but he basically says, there's just no better time than that you can spend with your little ones, and that's quiet and communication and building a relationship in so many different ways than on the pond and lake. And that's the way my father did with me. And then he kind of instilled that kind of more than passion, more of a more spiritual relationship time with the water and the outdoors. And that has grown in a lot of different ways. And in my career, I've kind of always been pushed to, a lot of lakes and ponds, because that's where my relationships were formed, cultured. But as we started this industry, I realized that the thirst of knowledge of everything that we did, when we went to the pond's edge, we sold, and I loved it because the pond owner or lake owner was talking about what they need. What is their problem? I'm here to help you have solutions. So, and it's a very huge value on their property. A lot of people would say, and I've talked to some realtors about this because, you always see on the sign that says for sale has a pond, and for sale, and it's always a pitch to get real estate value or just get somebody there to visit is that they have a pond or lake. And the best answer I ever heard, because I was trying to, how much does it appreciate your value of your home of building a pond? It was just interesting number values on that way. But it was, basically what the answer I was given by a realtor, it says it's very similar to a swimming pool. If the swimming pool is in bad shape, has poor water quality, it will deduct about a third of your property, your home. And the vice versa is if you have a fantastic swimming pool with perfect everything that somebody would desire, it increases your property, your home by the same amount. So there's a deviation of plus and minus 30, and that's substantial. And that could be 20, it could be 30, but my point being that lake and pond owners are wanting to try to get answers and solutions where we're all they were very highly motivated, and they wanted to learn about the property, and they wanted to learn about how they can increase the value. They wanted to learn all these aspects, and there just wasn't a great area of a place to come and learn. We were overworking already our governmental agencies, and a lot of the soil water conservations. They were asking them to do too much. And there was no organization which had the coalescence of this knowledge. And so it was a dream for about 5 or 6 years. And what happened about a year ago is we able to get a nonprofit, because I felt like it was needed to be a nonprofit to be able to cross and mend the areas of public and private together, and to which that it was a common place in which people could go and learn about and also learn science-based information, learn about the community and solutions to get to their problems, and then also to create a community within themselves. And that developed a nonprofit called Private Water Natural Resource Association, and the acronym is PWNRA. We don't even know the amount of volume and the amount of people, the amount of private pond owners there are in the U.S. It's just really, we have an estimate, 3 to 5 million is low end, and 6 to 8 in the last couple of years, and then I've gone all the way up. I've heard up to 10 million. The Lake Michigan, I just looked it up. It's like 14 million acre surface acreage, and if we have even a range, just to say somewhere 7, 8, just to say halfway, 7 million bodies of water, and they average 1 acre, then the amount of private waters is half of Lake Michigan. That is outstanding. That's mind blowing of how much body water that's out there, and real huge benefit also I see with a lot of value of private water is that the entry to fishing, and we're learning that the people that are holding the fishing license now are getting older, and the conservation of fisheries and especially sport fisheries is getting their money from license holders. We are seeing our average fishing license getting older, and we have this point of entry in which we're learning that these young people need to be involved and have a great fishing experience by age 17, because if they're not likely to have a fishing license down the road. So therefore, our conservation of the American sport fisheries is like the T-ball league. This is is where this is the point of entry. And
just to demonstrate that point even more, every few years, in Indiana, they do a survey of all their licensed anglers, and one of the questions they ask is, what type of water body do you prefer to fish in? And always, the last few times I've done the survey, the number one response has always been private ponds or private water. And these are people with licenses already. And a lot of, you don't need a license to fish in a lot of these ponds.
Right.
So that says that private water in Indiana, and I'm sure it's the same for many states, is absolutely the number one fishing location for people in the state. And you're right, it serves as an introduction for kids fishing. A lot of people build ponds or buy properties with ponds so that they can interact in nature with their grandkids or their kids. And yeah, it's just I think that analogy you used of the T-ball league, I think that's perfect.
It's true. And like the first a point of entry of fishing and getting a fishing license isn't buying a $60,000 bass boat and going to some big body of water, in a fishing tournament. Now we hope to get them there because it'd be great. But the point of it is yeah, they're going to catch. We got to get our youth, and that's going as industry to whole. I know 3 guys that are leaders in our industry that also on the side do have areas in which they spend a tremendous amount of time on youth and getting them getting them involved, and not only just wildlife as a whole, because they kind of have that emotional connection towards these towards this water. And to be honest with you, the private pond owner wants good water quality. They want, what everybody is. They want nutrient reduction. They don't want to alleviate. They don't want to be a problematic issue in their backyard because, and so it's all. Everybody, I think, has a really huge common goal, and that was where I wanted to have a lot of expression.
And I think too, private water can also serve as a really important introduction for people to conservation and good natural resources management. A lot of people hear of that. They know about these things, and you compared it to Lake Michigan. People know water quality is important into these big public areas, and conservation generally is important. But for a lot of people that don't interact with these large bodies of water, that's sort of just this concept out in the distance. But if you have water on your land that you have personal interest in managing well, learn about some of these basic natural resources and conservation sort of concepts, then I think that can also, that can increase people's awareness of conservation and resource management more broadly too. And so, it's obvious your passion for education in natural resources, private water, is led you to form this association, and we'll link to that website in our show notes. But like you said, you've got a podcast. It's called Sitting Dockside. Congratulations on reaching 40 episodes. That's great. Hopefully we'll get there one day. But tell us a little bit about the podcast. And I think I've listened to a few episodes, and it really complements a lot of the stuff we do here. But yeah, just tell us a little bit about it, some of the people you talk to on there, and stuff like that.
Yeah. So the other co-host so we felt like we needed to bring somebody in from the South just to have a large demographic through the United States, just because, I'm based in Indiana. We don't do Florida strain largemouth, but this Troy Goldsby. But Troy is just a amazing guy. He works with a lot of really famous people in a day-to-day, and manages a lot of their water. And he is able to communicate well because of he runs works with a lot of large body of waters and controlling a lot of their invasive species. So he had a very strong vegetative background, aquatic vegetation, and controls in a lot of different ways. So he was a very huge asset to bring in, and so we wanted to do that, but we also wanted to bring in subject matter experts. And that's where I have learned in my career is there's no absolute in pond management. There is no like 1, 2, 3. Every body of water is different. I own a fish hatchery, and you can go to ponds right over the levee and they look different colors. You look at it from satellite and it's a mirage of colors. They're sitting right next to each other, same watershed. You think, why are they so different? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on, and to be able to target that is a lot of different ways and solutions. So we knew that we had to come in a way of bringing these subject matter experts in that have done a specific strategy. We bring these subject matter experts in that talk about subject matters that are very, very interesting. We brought some fishery guys that we brought in. One was, I mentioned him earlier, Brian Grab. He's done some work on some habitat, and it was really phenomenal. A guy that is very influential, and he has a 100-acre lake. And then so what Brian did is brought in habitat in different fish cities, the amount. He talks about how big they are, and then is able to duplicate that and then just adding that fish habitat, what it did to the fishery population was staggering. Cool. And he's very great biologist, so he's able to show exactly what we needed to. We knew that habitat was important, but we had no idea it was this important, And, take a step back. We have done, when I started fishing, I had to fish in between the little algae mats. I was very good at casting because you only had a section about this big because, the ponds weren't managed like they are now. It's a growing industry. So it's like now we're getting good of understanding why that algae was there, looking at watershed and nutrients, and then able to target those species if they become a problem with really, really EPA certified algicides and herbicides, or harvesting, what that does and when to do it, when to understand the speciation. And so we're getting really good at getting these lake and ponds clean, but it may be not exactly what you're trying to achieve if you want certain goals like good water clarity or good fisheries and that sort of thing. Well, they desire some what macrophytes, what are rooted vegetation, but which ones do you leave? Which one do you take? Well, now we're now we're going from the pendulum is, you can see how the layers of the onion are starting to now it's becoming management. Now it's become, okay, what is your goals? What's your target? What do you see a day, a year from now? What's the perfect day on the pond? Tell me about it,
Yeah, I think, a couple of things that you said there is that, there's, every pond is different, right? And we like to be able to, provide general recommendations, but I think the education part is key, because if you can help people understand some of the processes and some of the things to consider, then they can start to evaluate their own specific situation, ask the right questions when they work with a professional, and stuff like that. And I think the other thing is that, there's a lot that you mentioned, how much private water there is, and there's not a lot of people that are available to help in some regions, and so I think, a lot of landowners will sort of be on their own, and I think the more information that they can get about how to do the right things and what's best in their situation, is the more they can get out of that, the better. So.
Yeah, I like how you said the processes. I haven't really thought about that way, but yeah, learning, teaching them what's going on so they can find their own solutions at the end. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
And getting people to really encouraging people to think about their goals, and like you said, there different strategies depending on your goal, and your goal is your goal. It's not your neighbor's goal. It's not what somebody else told you to do, right? And once you have a clear idea of what you want, then you can take the steps you need and hopefully see progress towards that goal in a year or so.
Yeah, exactly right.
Great. Well, we'll make sure we link to your stuff down below. We, if obviously encourage people to check out your podcast. You mentioned just a few topics you covered there. That's one thing that I've gotten away from listening to your podcast is you really speak to a lot of subject matter experts, and I'm sure you guys are learning a lot as well as your listeners along the way. So it's really great to hear from these experts and to hear the stories that they have to tell. So
if if somebody ever comes to you and says, this is the silver bullet of lake management, you can just kick them out the door, because I can guarantee you it's not, or this is the answer and this is going to change the industry. I don't know how many times I've heard a lot of that, is that because it's so many different strategies. I will talk about lake management or pond management as it's really similar to a balloon, right? And so let's just talk even farther. Let's just talk about nutrients, right? And 1 pound of phosphorus creates 500 pounds of algae. And so if we treat our algae, boom, we push in the balloon somewhere else. Well, that nutrients is going to go somewhere else. Where is it going to go? And so, okay, it's going to go into rooted vegetation. I don't want those because they'll take over the pond. Well, some will, some won't. Let's look at it a little bit more. Well, let's treat those. Boom. Well, where's that nutrients go? It's going to push in that. Now I'm pushing two different places. Well, it's going to go again somewhere unless you bind it or unless you harvest it, unless you do something in which you need to. And it's going to go to blue-green algae. And once phosphorus becomes very, very high, because it's a limiting element in fresh water, if it starts to become too high, and what we're learning is it's really higher than a lot of nitrogen, then we're promoting an algae called harmful algae blooms. And so now we're creating something that's you don't see as much, but has some green water that it's hard to eat by critters that critters in the water that fish eat. So it's just kind of like this thistle field, this microscopic thistle field out into your pond or lake that is not productive for anything. Add to the worst of that, they're very old, and if they get stressed or if we're learning a lot more otherwise, they can actually create some toxins and be detrimental and even fearful and harmful to you and to your pets and animals. So this is just a way in which every action in your lake and pond, it is an ecosystem. It has a reaction, and so if you can push that nutrients to a benevolent source, fish are 2% phosphorus. Macrophytes are, like I said, rooted vegetation are a really cool way of pushing those nutrients into different ways. But let's do it in a smart way. Let's also look at your inputs of nutrients. The edge of your pond doesn't end. It doesn't end at the water, right at the edge of the water. The start of your pond is you turn around and walk up. And once you stop walking up and start to crest to go back down, that's the edge of your pond. So the watershed is just as important as the water itself. And so understanding what is coming. So if you just change your watersheds, you change the way its uses, what you're treating of phosphorus or in sediments and that sort of thing. It's really going to affect your water, how the water or pond behaves. And so understanding these simple little, processes is will help you understand and a lot of answers for your lake and pond.
I think that's so important. Like what you're doing to your pond isn't just what you're doing to your pond. Like it spreads out, it goes downstream. A lot of the leakages that we've talked about before, that's impacting something else. And so making sure that you're using those right processes is so important.
It is. And to know what those processes are is important. I mean, like what with a lake or pond, they are so malleable and so reactive, and they heal well. It's not the end of the world if something would happen. And so that was encouraging for me. It might be a little more selfish, but just because you did one thing or another, it's not the end of the world. A lot of times you can get this thing corrected and get it in the right shape.
Pond Species Profile, the segment where we will showcase the biology and ecology of popular and not so popular pond species.
The pond species that we will profile in this episode is blue-green algae. Blue-green algae is actually not algae at all, but it is microscopic bacteria called cyanobacteria. These are naturally found in almost all bodies of water. However, certain species of blue-green algae can bloom in ponds, causing issues. Blue-green algae blooms typically occur when you get high nutrient inputs during the summer, or if you have recently killed off other types of algae that might compete with blue-green algae. Blue-green algae are undesirable in a pond for two main reasons. First, they are not readily eaten by things in the pond like other microscopic algae. Second, and more importantly, some blue-green algae can release toxins into the water that are harmful to people and animals. If you suspect a blue-green algae bloom in your pond, you should prevent people, pets, and livestock from entering or using the pond until the bloom can be treated. We hope to cover blue-green algae and harmful blooms in more detail in a future episode.
Great. And so, it's been great talking to you about, your path and some of the things you developed and your passion for private water. But I imagine you know a lot about a lot of things as well. And so we'd like to, ask you some questions about a few specific, pond practices and stuff like that. And one of the things that we've mentioned a little bit on our podcast so far, but we haven't really had a chance to dive into deeply is aeration. And I know that a lot of people are interested in aeration, and aeration can do different things, and you can use it for different reasons. And so it'd be great, over the next 15 minutes or so, if we could pick your brain a little bit about aeration and really dive in a bit deeper on that topic.
Sure. Well, aeration is a very hot topic, and it's one of the neat technological advances that we've done in ponds and lakes. We're understanding now that we are seeing, well, even on bodies of water that aren't continuously moving, which are most ponds and lakes. The natural physics of lakes is that they will actually separate. And you mean, what do you mean? Is that the colder water will actually sink to the bottom, and the warmer water will go to the top. And every person that's ever swam in a pond has probably swam and felt their feet get cold and say, oh, that's the spring. Well, it's not your spring. I'm sorry. It's actually the dynamics of water, and it's hard to wrap your head around is that the pond has separated even though it's water. What do you mean? It's like almost like oil and vinegar. And there's two ways to put air into a pond. And that's agitation, in which you move the water. May it be wind, may it be physical agitation or mechanical agitation, in which you create the amount of water that's agitated, and it releases its junk and takes in oxygen. And then the other one is photosynthesis. Well, it's just very simple. Anytime you have green water or green plants, they're respirating and they're producing oxygen. So if I'm a water droplet, and let's say I'm now cold and the pond has separated, now I will sink to the bottom. So I got to go really into these basics, because why talk about aerations if you don't really understand what they're doing? So if I'm a cold water droplet and I'm sinking to the bottom, remember, it's oil and vinegar. And I will say this, I have taken 1,000 readings of oxygen on the surface, and I have plenty of oxygen. And I'll go down and it'll be the same temperature, maybe a few degrees. It's very casual, go about 4 or 5. Now I'm getting to that 5 or 6 feet range. And then something weird really happens. I pass that layer, and it is dramatically changed. It goes in, you see the temperature change by sometimes 15, 20 degrees, and the oxygen just starts to plummet. And it is not linear, meaning it doesn't go from starting at 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. It goes 10, 9, 8, hit that line, 2. And then it go down, it goes all the way 1. So it's not like a crazy, like nice little slope. It is dramatically different. I want to make that point very clear. So if I'm down at the bottom and I'm a water droplet and I'm down there, there's 2 ways to put air into the pond: agitation and photosynthesis. Well, it's dark, so one way's out, photosynthesis, and then also agitation. Well, I'm heavy, I'm sinking down there, so therefore there's no way I'm getting mixed because I'm heavier. And to add that snowball down the hill is the sediments are the highest oxygen consumer in the entire lake. So the actual bottom, everything decomposing will take in your oxygen. So I'm losing oxygen at a dramatic rate. I can't get inputs of oxygen. So what happens? I actually lose oxygen down in that lower strata. And so your top, we said, well, my fish don't die every summer. Well, they move actually up above where they got good oxygen, and they'll hang there waiting until, the pond is able to thrive, and they'll move back down. So this area down there becomes void of oxygen. What do we do to eliminate this? Kind of get to your point, right? Is agitation, is aeration. So there's two forms of aeration. One is a surface aeration is basically sitting on top and either sprays up with a fountain. Anytime you spray water up in the air, you reduce its energy. So you're spinning its energy up high, making it look pretty, but you're reducing the amount of oxygen and how much it influences. So there's a paddle wheel and there's a surface aeration, but what they do is they kind of create an oxygen around it. But what I really want to focus on is what you're seeing more often now is bottom-based aeration system or bottom diffused aeration. And a lot of people think, well, I put this diffuser on the bottom of the pond and it gives oxygen. As the bubbles rise, the oxygen comes out of the bubble into the water, just like an aquarium. Well, it doesn't. It does a little bit, but as it rises, it will basically start to pick up water from the bottom and take it up. It's kind of like a balloon, a marble on a balloon. It rolls off, the next bubble comes up, and this water column, unconfined water column, basically is creating this emergence of this water. Now, the pond was stratified or had that layer in it, and we're eliminating that. So now we're getting oxygen mixing, or a mixing apparatus mixing from top to bottom. And when we do that, that does so many good things. Is that it changes back the digestions of the sediments to aerobic instead of anaerobic, or anoxic as I used before, and things start to decompose a little faster, actually. The byproduct of those is a lot more benign, so it's not toxic to life. And then also, which I failed to mention earlier, there's this little crazy element called iron, and iron is a really cool thing when it has oxygen around. And mentioned earlier, 1 pound of phosphorus creates 500 pounds of algae. Well, iron will bind with phosphorus if it's available. And so you actually will get some nutrient binding. Bottom-based aeration systems, the reason we look at them also is not they're aesthetically pleasing, but they're extremely functional. The amount of running amps utilized into these compressors that sit on the shoreline, and they will basically compress air. I think you mentioned that a couple of times on one of your shows, but they'll compress air down to the bottom to a diffuser, and the diffuser will rise. So the compressor actually sits on the shoreline. Well, the amount of running amps that it uses to de-stratify or eliminate that thermocline or allows that water for mixing to happen is really low. So the running cost, the capital cost is usually substantially less than a gigantic fountain with lights and everything else. And then, so there is some huge environmental benefits. The amount of fish that you can use if I went to you and say, if I could increase the size of your lake by a third or half for the small amount of money, you'd be like, yes, let's do it, Yeah. And then what we're doing that is just creating habitat by not allowing the pond to stratify. And then therefore the amount of abundance of pounds of fish per acre increase because you've created better water quality. Yeah, I will say this though, surface aeration has their point of view, it has their time. Like for instance, one is if in the hot of the summer you walk out and the fish are already at the surface, and you're like, oh, I'll run over there and turn on my bottom-based aeration system. Well, that is not what you need to be looking at doing, because your pond has already got some really bad stuff on bottom. You turn on the bottom-based aeration system, you may increase your problem. So the surface aeration system creates what I say is a sphere of influence. It's got a round circle of which is very high habitat in which fish can migrate to, and to which they can survive the stress of it. So they can so they have a place in which and they also work well in shallow ponds, shallow 5 feet or less. Surface aeration systems may be what you need to be looking at. And so that is the time that I would be. And there's different types. There's one with a paddle. There's ones that some of them are horizontal circulators, which are really cool. They can actually push water away from a shoreline that's creating a lot of algae, oxidizing that a little bit more intensely. There's paddle wheels that we use. We use that more in aquaculture when we're doing because there's a lot of moving parts. They break down a little bit more, and so but they add more oxygen when they run. So there's a time when you and time and place for each one of these. Just understanding those and there's a bunch of experts that you can be able to knock that out. I will say, if you're looking at doing it, get a couple quotes. Probably if they say they do an acre and they're this really small compressor, then I wouldn't be recommending it. Talk to some guys and making sure you're using the right amount and sizing these systems correctly. I need to say this in a very, very, and your listeners really need to listen up on this last part, is that remember, you're mixing this water. If you undersize this aeration system, this means, I'll get this one this year and then I'll get another one next year, like another diffuser. Well, you can't do that. You're in all or nothing. And having the right size is very, very, very important, because you need to get that device has to mix that water totally. If not, the bottom, the sediments, this is say you reduce it down to like 2 feet. Well, the bottoms are still producing a large amount of CO2 and hydrogen sulfides, and they're releasing phosphorus. And so because of iron, which I mentioned before, because an iron in an oxidative state will bind phosphorus, in an anoxic or not, it'll release it. So if you get a system that is just not sized correctly, then you will be maybe hurting yourself by pumping this phosphorus that's being released from your sediments back up to the top of the water column, where it can be utilized by sun, and then a lot of problems. So getting it sized correctly and wait until you can get it done right is very important, because you do not want to undersize bottom-based aeration systems, because they could be problematic.
And I guess on a similar note to that, you don't want to wait till the peak of summer to flick your bottom aeration on, because then you're going to be mixing up all that low oxygen water and that bad stuff. And so what recommendations would you have for people in terms of, when to run it, when not to run it, how long to leave it run?
That's a good question, because that's asked all the time. If I will say, there's certain times to run this, and the earlier you get it on before the pond stratifies, so it's not being behind, it's just less energy that it has to keep up, because once it's started behind, then it has to move more water. So when the leaves come out, because the ground temperature is very important for us. So when the leaves come out, then it's time to turn it on. When the leaves turn color, it's time to turn it off. Now, really cold nights, hot days, like cold and 30, 40s, even some low 50s, aeration is not as important, because your pond's turning over every day, and so we're getting oxygen in there. A lot of guys will say 24/7. Well, what they're saying is don't ever get behind the ball. If you're very, very have a good, smart management and proactive strategy, then what I say is leaves out in the spring. That's telling you that we're starting to warm up. When leaves start to turn colors in the fall, then we're hitting those colder nights. We can go ahead and shut her down as much. So.
And there are ponds differ in their susceptibility to this stratification, and if you know that you have a problem with fish kills in the summertime or things like that, then you know that you need to be a bit more on your game in terms of getting that aeration happening. If you know that most of the time, before you had your aerator, most of the time things were okay, then maybe you don't need to be as diligent in your particular pond.
If your lake is 60 years old, has a gigantic watershed, gets big every time just 1 inch of rain comes in, a lot of flow, has a lot of nutrients in there. Your what's called a BOD, is biological oxygen demand, is going to be very high compared to somebody just dug one right down the road the same size, and they have no organics at all. So the complement, what you're saying is like you understanding every lake and pond has its own personality, and understanding what those are is very important into your success of your management strategy.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to end up our conversation. But before we let you go, we like to do this with our guests. We ask if you have any particular recommendations for the listeners. So we usually ask for, books or podcasts. You're probably going to recommend your podcast. I would. But I don't know. You've probably read a lot of stuff and watched a lot of things over the years. Do you have any specific recommendations that listeners might be able to pick up?
Yeah, well, one is with I've seen a lot of what you guys publish with Purdue. If you're not seeing those publications, they're easy to get to, easy reads. I would really highly recommend you to get your feet wet, because they're a great resource. In that, it's really neat that one of the schools that are working towards private waters is so close to me, and I've spent some time at Purdue. I know it's a great place, and so it's really great that you would spend time looking at those resources. There's no doubt about it. Every state has their own management book. Take a look at that, and then and understand that a little bit of this that a lot of the management strategies and your goals aren't always in one book, but if you're understanding where they're coming from when they're writing a lot of this, is that they are trying to get you to that Mendoza line and trying to get you to a good pond. It may not be exactly what you envision, but it's getting you to understanding that what we're hitting on this podcast is processes to get that, so you can be able to build on that. So those are the two great resources, other than pwnra.org. Take a look at that in, of course, City and Dockside podcast. If I didn't say that right now, it wouldn't be a very good promoter.
Do you have any social media presences related to the nonprofit or your podcast that people can follow?
Oh, I should say we do have a really strong social media campaign on Facebook. Lake and Pond Questions Community and Content, or Content Community and something like that. But we have over 2,000 people that are very involved. I mean, it's 1.9 thousand as of like beginning of the week, and they're posting, and we grow, and it's only like 9 or 10 months old, so that's cool. It's very active in a closed group. That's pretty good growth for a niche industry. And and there's a lot of good questions putting out there. So what it does also is it feeds the content for the podcast. It's kind of like, what are the questions in there? And also our third area of growth, which we want to go, is bring eyeballs in, get everybody together, kind of like a church, right? Like the main, kind of get everybody in the pew, and then what gets the people to stay in the church is the community long term. And so that'll be, that's really great with the Facebook pages. Now people are actually starting to know each other, and they're starting to break outs and that sort of thing. And so that's happening a lot faster than I imagined things to occur, and so that's been really cool, and because that's the long-term growth, right? That's what's going to keep. I mean, instead of people just coming in and feasting on the knowledge and then leave. And so
putting it into practice.
And those communities, I think, are what can drive the long-term change in the industry too, right? All of a sudden, hopefully 10, 15 years from now, you get a whole bunch of pond owners who are a lot more knowledgeable than they were.
And that would be great. I will say is we're having these crazy, I think this podcast is going to be in the spring. Is that right? Or early? Well, the ice out is coming in.
Yep.
You need to walk around your lake or pond and spend some time looking at the bottom. There's right now it's textbook for winter kills. And the snow on the ice for such a long duration is very, it got me really nervous yeah, I think we lost in a single digit, even maybe even a double digit percentage, up to like 7 or 8 years ago. We had a really bad winter. Winter kills were really, really bad. A lot of people didn't even know it until they started fishing in June.
Wow.
And so, because
Mm-hmm.
the fish don't float, right? They a lot of times in winter kill,
Yeah.
they purge and they sit on the bottom. So walk around your lake or pond, um, and look at it and see if you see any floaters. A lot of times the fish will be on the bottom. Just investigate. We are going through a very stressful time right now with this winter, from Texas, which we were hearing all about, all the way up, you know, into the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the country's in very stressful times with this winter, and a winter is a stress event on ponds and lakes. So walking around there and seeing how well you fared is very important right now. And that's some advice that I would give your listeners. Take a look.
Yeah, that's great advice. And if you're concerned with what you see, reach out to some of your local, your local biologists, your experts, your extension agents. Reach out to them and start working on fully assessing what's happened and maybe working on a solution to help remedy your pond if you've had a fish kill. It's best to get on that and figure things out early rather than wait a year or so to fix it up. So.
Great.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Matt.
Yeah.
It's been I've learned a lot just talking to you, and it's great to see your passion for private waters. I think a lot of a lot of private water owners or landowners, they can really feel lost at a loss as what to do. They don't have the experience. It's not readily managed by the state governments or anything like that, and it can be frustrating, and they can feel a little bit left out in the cold. So. I think the education programs and the communities that you're building are fantastic, and I'm sure there are a lot of very grateful pond owners out there.
I appreciate the compliment. Which hopefully we hit what you need to, and for your listeners, and hopefully they can come and learn and hang out with you guys. And I really think what you're doing is great, even with the superhero Megan Gunn. And I love that name. That's just a wonderful name. And as we adjourn here, I really do thank the being asked to hang out with you guys. So.
Well, I really enjoyed talking and listening to Matt today. Mitch, what did you learn?
I learned a lot. It was great to see Matt's passion for private ponds and private lakes, and he really, maybe I sort of deep down knew some of this stuff, but really just providing some insight into the value of a private water and how it can support natural resources management and conservation across the landscape, not just in your pond. And I'm sure most pond owners are interested in what's happening in their pond, but I think they're really part of a bigger community, and I think the value of private ponds is really high, and so he did a great job of illustrating that. How about you? Was there anything that stuck out to you?
I mean, all of it, but well, one of the biggest things is the current license owners are older, and we have to make sure, if we're going to continue this conservation work, that the youth are engaged and interested in fishing and figuring out how to make that like a part of their lives.
Yeah, I think a pond, having a pond out on your property that you can take your kids out to, show them frogs, take them fishing, just introduce them to nature. I think that's invaluable, and if you can do a little bit better job in managing that, so that there are more fish for them to catch, or they see more wildlife coming in, then I think that's great. I'm from Australia. I'm from a marine system, and I love fishing, and I've been on the coral reef and all sorts of things. But every day, just about, I wish I live in suburbia here, but I wish I was able to have a pond on my property so that I could watch it change from day to day, or just duck out and see what's happening there. So these, I wouldn't underestimate the value of a pond on your property, and maybe it's something you've neglected for a while and sort of tried to just sort of put on the bottom of the pile. But I think putting some time and effort into into managing it and restoring it, I think is time well spent.
And then on a separate note, if you're interested in ever selling your property, having it in a good shape when you're ready to sell is only going to benefit you in that aspect too. That was just, I guess it's something that I also knew but wasn't really thinking about. The status of the body of water on your property is really going to change the appreciation value.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Either direction.
Yeah, that's right. I thought the analogy to a swimming pool was great.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, if you all enjoyed listening to our podcast, we also recommend you going and listening to the other podcasts that are in the Natural Resources University network. You can find us on social media in different at NR_university. And we are also on YouTube now, so you can kind of watch our floating faces as we talk to different guests, different subject content masters.
Yeah, and the podcast episodes will appear on YouTube, but we'll also have some additional video content that'll be posted to our YouTube channel. So definitely go along and subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for those that additional content.
Yes, and if you want to please always rate us, like us, give us feedback. But we have a new survey, so if you please fill out that survey. We want to know who's listening and how we can help you. So provide us with any suggestions for speakers or content you would like to hear about in the future.
Yeah, and a link to that survey. That survey will be anonymous and confidential, so you don't have to worry about that. It takes like a minute, so just do it at the end of the episode here, and that link will be down in the show notes.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for listening again, and we'll see you all later.
Bye.
Cheerio. Pond University is hosted by Purdue University and Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. Pond University is part of the podcast network Natural Resources University, which is supported by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you liked Pond University, then check out the other podcasts in the Natural Resources University podcast network. Purdue University and Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant are equal opportunity, equal access, and affirmative action institutions.